My cat is wanting attention. And since she's wanting attention, my arm is getting clawed up. Alright, welcome in. Yeah, I hear you. Meh. Cute baby. Just a cute kitty baby. Welcome in. It is Thursday, which means we get to do some Gaslight Mysteries. Ow! Claws! Ow! Aria. Ow. Baby girl. What do you want? You want me to hold you? Fine, I will hold you. You will hate it. It's your kitten. But yeah. Doing more Rivals of Sherlock Holmes tonight. Provided my cat doesn't claw me to death just wanting attention. But she's a sweet cat. She's a very good kitty girl. Yeah, she's a sweet baby. Hey, Taka, welcome in. And congrats on getting second. Guilty, congrats on getting first. How is my sound out there? I found out what the current buzzing noise is. Since I'm using Razer gear that has LEDs in it, it tends to flash with the pattern, so. I turned on the webcam so you can see my adorable cat, but I haven't set that up yet. And for once, she's actually fine with me holding her. That kind of concerns me a little. She doesn't like being held. Oh, don't snuggle in my arms, you fluff baby. You fluff baby, what are you doing? Oh, back down. Ouch. You just went down. Why do you want to be pet again? Silly kitten. Stop clawing me. I don't want to start wearing a jacket just for streams. Or my fencing jacket's the only thing your claws can't penetrate. Anyway, yeah. Do you hear that adorable meow? That meow? Yeah. I've been in here for a couple hours trying to get stuff done and modding other channels, and she waits until I'm streaming to come in here to harass me. She's such a kitten. She's such a kitty. With sharp dagger claws. Ow. Get the needles out of my side. Thank you. Ugh. Anyway, I guess we'll see how well I can read when I'm getting needled by a kitten. Let's go ahead and go over to study and see if my fireplace is working properly. Of course it's in an ad. Can you hear the fireplace? I don't hear it. Okay, that's too loud. Get back down here. Okay. But anyway, I put a poll on Twitter. Yep, snap, crackles, pops. Whatever it is. Where is... Oh, Rebels too. Yeah, that fireplace back there. It's always nice to have a fireplace when you're reading. Anyway, I put up a poll on Twitter because I technically met my goal, the 400 followers. I'd put up the goal on it. If we reached it before this year, I would read some of my autobiography on stream. But since we didn't reach it until the day before my birthday, which, of those who don't know, was yesterday, I was wondering if I should go ahead and try to read some of it. So feel free to answer the poll on Twitter. And yes, I do have the dumpy emote now. Which means, once more, all of my emotes are filled. Unless somehow I manage to get 30 subscribers, and then I can get one more. Whoopee. But yeah. But the goal has been updated to 500 for this year. I don't know, good luck getting it, but, you know. Especially since I am kind of, well, definitely a niche streamer. I do have the computer up and running. I have played a few games on it. I was tempted to stream yesterday playing games. Then I got sidetracked watching other people streaming. So... yeah, I wish 500 was easy. Of course, I also noticed my own login thing. I started my Twitch account, let's see, back in 2016. It says I created my Twitch account October 30th, 2016, and that's crazy enough as it is. Because I started streaming in August of 2021. And now I'm here. Been an affiliate for over 2 years. Been streaming for a lot longer. But anyway, enough of my blabbering on about me. Maybe I should read a story or two. Or three, depending on how much time we have. Where is my bookmark? Oh, there it is. Let's see, is there be multiple stories from this author, or is it just one? Okay, just one on this time. Okay. Let's see. Page 31. So our first story for this wonderful Gaslight Thursday. I really need to get a better title. I mean, I've just been using Beyond Baker Street, which is, stories outside of Sherlock Holmes. And this is the second book of Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. I don't believe there's a third. Ooh, I know this last name. Okay. Hydrate real quick. So our first story for the evening. The Clue of the Silver Spoons. A Detective Tale by Robert Barr. When the card was brought in to me, I looked upon it with some misgiving, for I scented a commercial transaction. And although such cases are lucrative enough, nevertheless, I, Eugene Valmont, formerly high in the service of the French government, do not care to be connected with them. They usually pertain to sordid business affairs that present little that is of interest to man, who in his time has dealt with subtle questions of diplomacy upon which the welfare of nations sometimes turned. The name of Bentham Gibbs is familiar to everyone, connected as it is with much advised pickles, whose glaring announcements in crude crimson and green strike the eye everywhere in England. The shock of artistic tastes were ever seen. Me, I've never tasted them, and shall not, so long as a French restaurant remains open in London, but I doubt they are as pronounced to the palate as the advertisement is distressing to the eye. If, then, this gross pickle manufacturer expects me to track down those who are infringing upon recipes for making his so-called sauces, chutneys, and the like, he would find himself mistaken, for I was now in a position to pick and choose cases, and a case of pickles did not allure me. "Beware of imitations," says the advertisement. "None genuine without a facsimile of the signature of Bentham Gibbs." Ah, well, not for me were either the pickles or the tracking of imitators. A forged check, yes, if you like, but a forged signature of Mr. Gibbs on a pickle bottle was not for me. Nevertheless, I said to Armand, "Show us the gentleman in," and he did so. To my astonishment, there entered a young man, quite correctly dressed in a dark frock coat, faultless waistcoat and trousers, that proclaimed the Bond Street tailor. When he spoke, his voice and language were those of a gentleman. "Monsieur Valmont?" he inquired. "At your service," I replied, bowing and waving my hand as Armand placed a chair for him and withdrew. "I am a barrister with chambers in Temple," began Mr. Gibbs, "and for some days a matter has been troubling me about which I have now come to seek your advice, your name having been suggested by a friend in whom I confided." "Am I acquainted with him?" I asked. "I think not," replied Mr. Gibbs. "He is also a barrister with chambers in the same building as my own. Lionel Dacre is his name." "I never heard of him." "Very likely not. Nevertheless, he recommended you as a man who could keep his own counsel, and if you take up this case, I desire the utmost secrecy preserved, whatever may be the outcome." I bowed, but made no protestation. Secrecy is a matter of course with me. The Englishman paused for a few moments, as if he expected fervent assurances, and then he went on with no trace of disappointment on his countenance at not receiving them. "On the night of the 23rd I gave a little dinner to 6 friends of mine in their own rooms. I may say that so far as I am aware they are all gentlemen of impeccable character. On the night of the dinner I was detained later than I expected at a reception, and in driving to the Temple was still further delayed by a block of traffic in Piccadilly, so that I arrived at my chambers. There was barely time for me to dress and receive my guests. My man Johnson had everything laid out for me in my dressing room, and as I passed through it I hurriedly flung off my coat I was wearing, and I carelessly left it over the back of the chair of the dining room, where neither Johnson nor myself noticed it until my attention was called to it after dinner was over, and everyone was rather jolly with wine. This coat had an inside pocket. Usually any frock coat I wear in the afternoon reception has not an inside pocket. But I had been rather on the rush all day. My father is a manufacturer whose name may be familiar to you, and I am on the director's board of his company. On this occasion I had had to take a cab from the city of the reception I spoke of, and had not time to go and change at my rooms. The reception was a somewhat bohemian affair, extremely interesting, of course, but not too peculiar as to costume. So I went as I was. In this inside pocket rested a thin package composed of 2 pieces of pasteboard, and between them 5 20-pound Bank of England notes, folded lengthways and held in place between 2 pasteboards by an elastic rubber band. I had thrown the coat over the chair in such a way that the inside pocket was exposed, and the ends of the notes plainly recognizable. Over the coffee and cigars, one of my guests laughingly called attention to the termed my vulgar display of wealth, and Johnson, in the same confusion and having neglected to put the coat away, now picked it up and took it to the reception room, where the wraps of my guests lay about curiously. He should, of course, have placed it in my wardrobe, but he said afterwards he thought it belonged to a guest who had spoken. You see, he was in my dressing room when I threw the coat on the chair, making it my way there, and, of course, he had noticed the coat in the hurry of arriving guests, otherwise he would have put it where it belonged. After everyone had gone, Johnson came to me and said the coat was there, but the package was missing, nor was there any trace of it to be found since that night. The dinner was fetched from the outside, I suppose? Yes. How were the waiters served it? Two men. They were men who had often been in my employ before, but apart from that, they had left the chambers before the incident of the coat happened. Neither of them went to the reception room, I take it. No, I am certain that not even suspicion can attach to either of their waiters. Your man Johnson. He has been with me for years. He could easily have stolen much more than £100 if he had wished to, but I have never known him to take a penny that did not belong to him. Will you favor me with the names of your guests, Mr. Gibbs? Viscount Sturm sat at my right hand, and at my left Lord Templemore. Sir John Sinclair next to him, and Angus McKellar next to Sinclair. The Viscount Sturm was Lionel Dacre, and at his right was Vincent Innes. On a sheet of paper I had written the names of the guests and noted their places on the table. Which guest drew your attention to the money? Lionel Dacre. Is there a window looking out from the reception room? Two of them. Were they fastened on the night of the dinner party? I could not be sure. Johnson would know, very likely. You are hinting at the possibility of a thief coming in through a reception window while we were sitting somewhat noisily over our wine. I think such a solution highly improbable. My rooms are on the third floor, and a thief would scarcely venture to make an entrance when he could not but know there was company being entertained. Besides this, the coat was there for but an hour or so, and it seems to me whoever stole those notes knew where they were. That sounds reasonable, I had to admit. Have you spoken to anyone of your loss? No one but Dacre, who recommended me to see you. Oh, yes, and to Johnson, of course. I could not help noting that this was the fourth or fifth time Dacre's name had come in during our conversation. Why to Dacre? I asked. Well, you see, he accompanies Chambers in the same building on the ground floor. He's a good fellow, and we are by way of being firm friends. Then it was he who called attention to the money, so I thought you should know the sequel. How did he take your news? Now that I call attention to the fact, he seemed slightly troubled. I should like to say, however, that you must not be misled by that. Lionel Dacre could no more steal than he could lie. Did he seem surprised when you mentioned the theft? Bentham Gibbs paused a moment before replying, knitting his brows in thought. No, he said at last, and come to think of it, it almost appears as if he had been expecting the announcement. Doesn't that strike you as rather strange, Mr. Gibbs? Really, my mind is in such a whirl I don't know what to think. But it's perfectly absurd to suspect Dacre. If you knew the man, you would understand what I mean. He comes from an excellent family, and he is Lionel Dacre, and when you have said that, you have made a suspicion absurd. No, Johnson and myself, no. I suppose you had the rooms thoroughly searched. The packet didn't drop out or remained unnoticed in some corner. No, Johnson and I examined every inch of the premises. Hey, Nia. Let's see, what were you up to? Ah, playing Palia. Cool. How was it? It's been going pretty good. Other than, being cold, but kind of used to that now. Cozy chill games are always good. But if you need to do any after stream care, take a break, rest, relax, that kind of thing, feel free to. I want to check something real quick. Was it me? Yes, I came in with a raid. I lurk everywhere, honestly. It's always fun seeing myself as a raider on my own channel. Again, welcome in, and thank you for coming in. So that is when I'm lurking and I have the audio just down so low. Then I start hearing more and more echo when more of my friends raid in. It gets weird after a while. Because none of them are in sync. That's like, okay, which tab am I hearing everything from? It's strange enough that I have OBS set up so I can hear the outgoing as well as the incoming, and then I'm watching the stream manager on Twitch, so I've got that window, so I automatically get 2 echoes. As long as the echoes don't play out into the stream, then it's fine. I hear voices in my head all the time, and hearing echoes in my head are just, I guess normal. But yeah. Let's see, where was I? There we go. No, Johnson and myself examined every inch of the premises. Have you the number of the notes? Yes, I got them from the bank next morning. Payment was stopped, and so far not one of the 5 has been presented. Of course, 1 or more may have been cashed at some stop, and none have been offered to any of the banks. A £20 note is not accepted without scrutiny, so the chances are the thief may have had some difficulty in disposing of them. As I told you, I don't mind the loss of the money at all. It is the uncertainty, the uneasiness caused by the incident which troubles me. You will comprehend when I say that if you are good enough to interest yourself in the case, I shall be disappointed if your fee does not exceed the amount I have lost. Mr. Gibbs rose as he said this, and I accompanied him to the door, assuring him that I should do my best to solve the mystery. Whether he sprang from pickles or not, I realized he was a polished and generous gentleman who estimated the services of a professional expert like myself at their true value. Thank you, Nia. I shall not give the details of my researches during the following few days, because the trend of them must be gone over in the remarkable interview I had somewhat later, and there is a little use of repeating myself. Suffice it to say, the examination of the rooms of a close cross-questioning of Johnson satisfied me that he and the two waiters were innocent. I was also convinced that no theft was made his way through the window, and I came to the conclusion that the notes were stolen by one of the guests. Further investigation convinced me that the thief was no other than Lionel Dacre, the only one of the six in pressing need of money at the time. I had Dacre shadowed, and during one of his absences made the acquaintance of his man Hopper, a surly, impolite brute who accepted my golden sovereign quickly enough, but gave me little in exchange for it. But while I conversed with him, there arrived in the passage where we were talking together a large case of champagne bearing one of the best-known names in the trade, and branded as being of the vintage of '78. Now, I know that the product of Camelot Ferrez is not bought so easily as British beer, and I had learned that 2 short weeks before Mr. Lionel Dacre was at his wits' end for money, yet he was still in the same briefless barrister he had ever been. On the morning of my unsatisfactory conversation with this man Hopper, I was astonished to receive the following note, written on a dainty correspondence card. 3 and 4 Vellum Buildings, in a Temple, E.C. Mr. Lionel Dacre presents his compliments to Monsieur Eugene Valmont, and would be obliged if Monsieur Valmont would make it convenient to call upon him in his chambers tomorrow morning at 11. Had the man become aware that he was being shadowed, or did the surly servant inform him of the inquiries made? I was soon to know. I called punctually at 11 next morning, and was received with charming urbanity by Mr. Dacre himself. The taciturn Hopper evidently had been sent away for the occasion. "My dear Signor Valmont, I am delighted to meet you," said the young man with more effusiveness than I had ever witnessed in an Englishman before, although his very next words supplied and explained that did not occur to me until afterwards was somewhat far-fetched. "I believe we are by the way of being countrymen, and therefore, although the hour is early, I hope you will allow me to offer you some of that bottled sunshine of the year '78, from La Belle France, to whose prosperity and honor we shall drink together. For such a toast my hour is propitious." And to my amazement he brought forth the case I had seen arrive 2 days before, a bottle of that superb vintage. "Now," said I to myself, "it is going to be difficult to keep a clear head if the aroma of that nectar rises to the brain. But tempting as is the cup, I shall drink sparingly, and hope he may not be so studious." Sensitive, I already experienced the charm of his personality, and well understood the friendship Mr. Bentham Gibbs felt for him. But I saw the trap spread before me. He expected, under the influence of champagne and courtesy, to extract a promise from me which I must find myself unable to give. "Sir, you interest me in claiming kinship with France. I had understood that you belonged to one of the eldest families in England." "Ah, England," he cried, with the expressive gesture of outstanding hands, truly Parisian in its significance. "The trunk belongs to England, of course, but the the root, Monsieur Valmont, penetrated the soil from which this wine and the gods has been drawn." Then, filling my glass and his own, he cried, "The France, which my family left in the year 1066. I could not help laughing at his fervent ejaculation. 1066. Ah, that is a long time ago, Mr. Dacre. In years, perhaps, but in feelings but a day. My forefathers came over to steal, and Lord, how well they accomplished it. They stole the whole country, something like theft, say I, under the Prince of Robbers, well named the Conqueror. In our secret hearts, we all admire a great thief, if not a great one, then an expert one, who covers his tracks so perfectly that the hounds of justice are baffled in attempting to follow him. Now, even you, Monsieur Valmont, I can see you're most generous of men, with a lively sympathy found in perfection only in France. Even you must suffer a pang of regret when you lay a thief by the heels who has done his task deftly. I fear, Mr. Dacre, you credit me with magnanimity to which I dare not lay claim. The criminal is a danger to society. True, you are in the right, Monsieur Valmont. Still, admit there are cases that would touch you tenderly. Example, a man ordinarily honest, a great need, a sudden opportunity. He takes that of which another has abundance, and he nothing. What then, Monsieur Valmont? Is a man to be sent to perdition for momentary weakness? His words astonished me. Was I on the verge of hearing confession? It almost amounted to that already. Mr. Dacre, I said, I cannot enter your subtleties you pursue. My duty is to find the criminal. You are right, Monsieur Valmont, and I am enchanted to find so sensible a head on French shoulders. Although you are a mere recent arrival, if I may say so, than myself, you nevertheless already give utterance to the sentiments which do honor to England. It is your duty to hunt down the criminal. Very well, in that I think I can aid you. So I have taken the liberty of requesting your attendance here this morning. Let me fill your glass again, Monsieur Valmont. No more, I beg you, Mr. Dacre. What? Do you think the receiver is as bad as the thief? I was taken aback at this remark, and I suppose my face showed the amazement within me. But the young man merely laughed with apparently free-hearted enjoyment, poured more wine in his own glass, and tossed it off. Not knowing what to say, I changed the trend of conversation. Mr. Gibbs says that you have been kind enough to recommend me to his attention. May I ask how you came to hear of me? Who has not heard of the renowned Monsieur Valmont? As he said this for the first time, there began to grow a suspicion in my mind that he was chaffing me, as it is called in England, a procedure which I cannot endure. Indeed, if this young man practiced it in my own country, he would find himself with a duel on his hands before he had gone too far. However, the next instant his voice resumed its original fascination, and I listened to it with some delicious melody. I have only to mention my cousin, Lady Gladys Dacre, and you will at once understand why I recommended you to my friend. The case of Lady Gladys, you will remember, required a delicate touch which is not always to be had in this land of England, except when those who possess the gifts do us the honor to sojourn with them. I noticed that my glass was filled again, and as I bowed my acknowledgments of this compliment, I indulged in another sip of the delicious wine, and then I sighed, for I began to realize it was going to be a difficult time for me, in spite of my disclaimer, to tell this man's friend he had stolen the money. All this time he had been sitting on the edge of the table, while I occupied a chair at its end. He sat there in careless fashion, swinging a foot to and fro. Now he sprang to the floor and drew up a chair, placing on the table a blank sheet of paper. Then he took from the mantel-shelf a pocket of letters, and I was astonished to see they were held together by 2 bits of cardboard and a rubber band, similar to the combination that first held the banknotes. In great nonchalance, he slipped off the rubber band and threw it and the pieces of cardboard into the table before me, leaving the documents loose to his hand. Now, Monsieur Valmont, he cried gently, You have been occupied for several days on this case, the case of my dear friend Bentham Gibbs, who is one of the best fellows in the world. He said the same of you, Mr. Dacre. I am gratified to hear it. Would you mind letting me know what the point of your researches have led you? They have led me in the direction, rather to a point. In the direction of a man, of course. Certainly. Who is he? Will you pardon me if I decline to answer you at the present moment? That means you are not sure. It may mean, Mr. Dacre, that I am not employed by Mr. Gibbs and do not feel the liberty to disclose another of the results of my quest without his permission. But Mr. Bentham Gibbs and I see entirely as one in this matter. Perhaps you are aware that I am the only person with whom he discussed the case besides yourself. That is undoubtedly true, Mr. Dacre. Still, you see the difficulty in my position. Yes, I do, and so shall not press you further. But I have been interesting myself in a purely amateurish way, of course. You would perhaps have no disinclination to learn whether my deductions agree with yours? Oh, not in the least. I should be very glad to know the conclusion at which you have arrived. May I ask you if you suspect anyone in particular? Yes, I do. Will you name him? No, I shall copy the admirable reticence you yourself have shown. And now let us attack the mystery in the sane and businesslike manner. You have already examined the room. Well, here's a rough sketch of it. There's the table and the corner of the chair on which the coat is hung. There sat Gibbs at the head of the table. Those on the left hand had their backs to the chair. I, being in the center to the right, saw the chair, the coat, and the notes, and called attention to them. Now our first duty is to find a motive. If it were a murder, our motive might have been hatred, revenge, robbery, what you like. It is simply the stealing of money. The man must have either been born a thief, or else some hitherto innocent person possessed to the crime by great necessity. Do you agree with me, Mr. Valmont? Perfectly. You follow exactly the line of my own reasoning. Very well. It is unlikely that the born thief was one of Mr. Gibbs' guests. Therefore, we are reduced to look for a man under the spur of necessity, a man who has no money of his own, but must raise a certain amount, let us say by a certain date. If he can find such a man in the company, do you not agree with me that he is likely to be the thief? Yes, I do. Then let us start our process of elimination. Out goes Viscount Stern, a man with 20,000 acres of land, and nobody quite knows what income. I mark off the name of Lord Templemire, one of His Majesty's judges, entirely above suspicion. The next, Sir John Sinclair. He is also rich, but Vincent Innes is still richer, so the pencil obliterates his name. Now we have Angus McKellar, an author of some note, as you are well aware, deriving a good income from his books, and a better one from his plays. A canny Scot, and may rub his name out of the paper for more memory. How do you rate your correspondence with yours, Monsieur Valmont? They correspond exactly, Mr. Dacre. I am flattered to hear it. That remains one name untouched. Mr. Lionel Dacre, the descendant, as we have said, of robbers. I have not said so, Mr. Dacre. Ah, my dear Valmont, the politeness of your country asserts itself. Let us not be deluded, but follow our inquiry wherever it leads. I suspect Lionel Dacre. What do you know of his circumstances before the dinner of the 23rd? As I made no reply, he looked up at me with frank boyish face, illuminated with a winning smile. You know nothing of his circumstances? He asked. It grieves me to state that I do. Mr. Lionel Dacre was penniless on the night of the dinner on the 23rd. Oh, don't exaggerate, Monsieur Valmont, cried de Craye with a laugh. He had 1 sixpence, 2 pennies, and a halfpenny. How did you know he was penniless? I knew he ordered a case of champagne from the London representative of Camelot Frères, and was refused until he paid the money down. Quite right. And my page is shut. Quite right. Then we were talking to Hopper when you saw that case of champagne delivered. Excellent, excellent, Monsieur Valmont. But will real man Steele think to supply himself with even so delicious a wine as this we have been tasting? And by the way, forgive my neglect, allow me to fill your glass, Monsieur Valmont. Not another drop, if you will excuse me. Yes, champagne should not be mixed with evidence. When we have finished, perhaps, what further proof have you? I have proof that Mr. Dacre was threatened with bankruptcy if on the 24th he did not pay a bill of £28 that had long been outstanding. I have proof that this was paid, not on the 24th, but on the 26th. Mr. Dacre had gone to a solicitor and had assured him he would have the money on this date, whereupon he was given 2 days' grace. Book keeps trying to shut. Well, he was entitled to 3, you know, by law. Yes, then, Monsieur Valmont, you touch the fatal point. That threat of bankruptcy will drive a man in Dacre's position to almost any crime. Bankruptcy to a barrister spells ruin. It means a career blighted. It means life buried with little chance of resurrection. I see you grasp the supreme importance of that bit of evidence. The case of champagne is of nothing compared to it. And this reminds me that, in the crisis, I shall take another sip. With your permission. Sure you won't join me? Not at this juncture, Mr. Dacre. I envy your moderation. Here's to the success of our search, Monsieur Valmont. I felt sorry for the gay young fellow as, with smiling face, he drank the champagne. Now, Monsieur, he went on, I'm amazed to learn how much you have found out. Really, I think tradespeople, solicitors, and all such keep better guard on their tongues than I do. Nevertheless, these documents I have at my elbow, and which I expected would surprise you, are merely the letters and receipts. Here is a letter from the solicitor threatening me with bankruptcy. Here is the receipt dated the 26th. Here is the refusal of the wine merchant, and here is the receipt for the money. Here are the smaller bills liquidated. With my pencil, we will add them up. £78 bulks large. We add the smaller items, and it totals £23, 7 shillings and a fourpence. Let us now examine my purse. Here's a £5 note. There's a minted sovereign. Here's 12 and a 6pence of silver. Here's 2 pence in copper. Now the purse is empty. Let us add this to the amount on the paper. Do you see my eyes deceive me, or is it exactly £100? There is the stolen money accounted for. Pardon me, Mr. Dacre, I said, but there's still a sovereign on the mantelpiece. Dacre threw back his head and laughed with greater heartiness than I had yet known him to indulge in during our short acquaintance. By Jove, he cried, you've got me there. I'd forgotten entirely about that pound on the mantelpiece, which belongs to you. To me? Impossible. It does, and cannot interfere with the least of our £100 calculation. That is the sovereign you gave to my man, Hopper, who, believing me hard-pressed, took it that I might have enjoyment of it. Hopper belongs to our family, or the family belongs to him. I'm never sure which. You must have missed him in the differential bearing of a manservant in Paris. Yet he is true gold, like a sovereign you bestowed upon him, and he bestowed upon me. Now here, monsieur, is the evidence of the theft, together with the rubber band and the 2 pieces of cardboard. Ask my friend Gibbs to examine them minutely. They are all at your disposition, monsieur, and you will learn how much easier it is to deal with the master than the servant when you wish to information. All the gold you possess would not have wrung these incriminating documents from old Hopper. I had to send him away today for the West End, fearing that his brutal British way might be assaulted you, and if you'd gotten an inkling of your mission. Mr. Dacre, I said slowly, you have thoroughly convinced me. I thought I would, he interrupted me with a laugh, that you did not take the money. On this, a change of wind, surely Many a man has been hanged through a chain of circumstantial evidence much weaker than this, which I have just exhibited to you. Why don't you see the subtlety of my action? 99 persons in 100 would say no man could be such a fool to put Valmont on his track, and then place at Valmont's hands such striking evidence. But there comes in my craftiness. Of course, you rock up the run against Mrs. Gibbs' incredulity. The first question he will ask you may be this: why did Dacre not come to me to borrow the money? Now there you have a certain weakness in your chain of evidence. I know perfectly well that Gibbs would lend me the money, and he knew perfectly well that if I pressed to the wall I should ask him. Mr. Dacre, I said, you have been playing with me. I should resent that with most men, but whether it is your own genial manner or the effect of this excellent champagne, or both together, I forgive you. But I am convinced of another thing. You know who took the money. I don't know or suspect. Will you tell me whom you suspect? That would not be fair, but I shall now take the liberty of filling your glass with the champagne. I am your guest, Mr. Dacre. Admirably answered, monsieur, he replied, pouring out the wine. Now I shall give you the clue. Find out about the story of the silver spoons. The story of the silver spoons? What silver spoons? Ah, that is the point. You step out of the temple into Fleet Street, seize by the shoulder of the first man you meet, and ask him to tell you about the silver spoons. There are but 2 men, and 2 spoons concerned. When you learn who those 2 men are, you will know that one of them did not take the money, and give you assurance that the other did. You speak in mystery, Mr. Dacre. But certainly, for I am speaking to Monsieur Eugene Valmont. I echo your words, sir, admirably answered. You put me in my mettle, but I flatter myself that I see your kindly drift. You wish me to solve the mystery of the stolen money, sir, you do me the honor, and I drink to your health. To yours, monsieur, said Lionel Dacre, and here is a further piece of information which my friend Gibbs would never have given you. When he told me the money was gone, I cried in the anguish of independent bankruptcy. I wished to goodness I had it, whereupon he immediately compelled me to accept a cheque for £100, of course, which, as I've shown you, alas, only £6 12 and 8 remains. On leaving Mr. Dacre, I took a hansom to the cafe in Regent Street, which is a passable imitation of similar places of refreshment in Paris. There, calling for a cup of black coffee, I sat down to think. The clue of the silver spoons. He had laughingly suggested that I should take by the shoulders the first man I meet and ask him what the story of the silver spoon was. This course naturally struck me as absurd. Nevertheless, it contained a hint. I must ask someone, and that's the right person, to tell me the tale of the silver spoons. Under the influence of black coffee, I reasoned it on in this way. On the night of the 23rd, some one of the 6 guests there stole £100, but Dacre said that one of the actors in the silver spoon episode was the actual thief. That person, then, must have been one of Mr. Gibbs' guests at the dinner of the 23rd. Probably 2 of the guests were the participators of the silver spoon comedy. But, be that as it may, it followed that one least of the men around Mr. Gibbs' table knew the episode of the silver spoons. Perhaps Bentham Gibbs himself was cognizant of it. It followed, therefore, that the easiest plan was to question each of the men who partook in the dinner. Yet, if one only knew about the spoons, that one must also have some idea that these spoons formed a clue which attached him to the crime on the 23rd, in which case he was likely to divulge what he knew, and that to an entire stranger. Of course, I might go to Dacre himself and demand the story of the silver spoons, but this would be a confession of failure on my part, and I rather dreaded Lionel Dacre's hearty laughter when I admitted that the mystery was too much for me. Besides this, I was very well aware of the young man's kindly intentions towards me. He wished me to unravel the coil myself, and so I determined not to go to him except as a last resort. I resolved to begin with Mr. Gibbs, and finishing off my coffee, got again into a hansom and drove back to the temple. I found Mr. Gibbs in his room, and after greeting me, his first inquiry was about the case. "How are you getting on?" he asked. "I think I'm getting on fairly well," I replied, "and expect to finish in a day or two, if you will kindly tell me the story of the silver spoons." "Silver spoons," he echoed, quite evidently not understanding me. There happened to an incident in which two men were engaged, and this incident related to a pair of silver spoons. I want to get the particulars about that. "I haven't the slightest idea what you're talking about," replied Gibbs, thoroughly bewildered. "You will have to be a bit more definite. I fear you've to get any help from me." "I cannot be more definite, because I have already told you all I know." "What bearing has all this on our own case?" "I was informed that if I got a hold of this clue of the silver spoons, I should be in a fair way of settling our case." "Who told you that?" "Mr. Lionel Dacre." "Ah, does Dacre refer to his own conjuring?" "I don't know, I'm sure. What was his conjuring?" "A very clever trick he did one night at dinner about 2 months ago." "Had it anything to do with silver spoons?" "Well, it was silver spoons or silver forks or something of that kind. I'd entirely forgotten the accident. So far as I recollect, there was a sleight-of-hand man with great experience in one of the music halls in town talked to him. Then Dacre said the tricks he did was easy, and holding up a spoon and a fork, I don't remember which, asserted his ability to make it disappear before our eyes, and to be found afterwards in the clothing of someone else present. Silver offered to make him a bet that he could do nothing of the kind, but he said that he would bet no more than one Innes, who sat opposite him. Innes, with some recollection, accepted the bet, and when Dacre gestured a great show of the usual conjurer's gesticulation, spread forth his empty hands and said we should all find the spoons in Innes's pocket. And there, sure enough, it was. It was a clever trick, but we were never able to get him to repeat it." "Thank you very much, Mr. Gibbs. I think I see daylight now." "If you do, you're cleverer than I, by the long chalk," cried Bentham Gibbs, as I took away my departure. I went directly downstairs and knocked on Mr. Dacre's door once more. He opened the door himself. His man was not yet having returned. "Ah, monsieur," he cried. "Back already? You don't mean to tell me that you have so soon gotten to the bottom of the silver spoon entanglement?" "I think I have, Mr. Dacre. You were sitting in dinner opposite Mr. Vincent Innes. You saw him conceal a silver spoon in his pocket. You probably waited for some time to understand what he meant by this, and you did not return the spoon to its place. You proposed a conjuring trick, made the bet with him, and thus the spoon was returned to the table." "Excellent, excellent, monsieur. That is very nearly what occurred, except that I acted at once. I had experience of Mr. Vincent Innes before. Never did he come to these rooms without my missing some little trinket after he was gone. I am not a man of many possessions, while Mr. Innes is a very rich person, and so, in taking as anything if taken, I have little difficulty in coming to a knowledge of my loss. Of course, I have never mentioned these disappearances to him. They were all trivial, as I have said, and so far as the silver spoon is concerned, it was of no great value either. But I sought the bet and to recover the spoon, which would teach him a lesson. It apparently has not done so. On the night of the 23rd he sat at my right hand, as you will see by consulting our diagram on the table. I asked him a question twice, to which he did not reply, and looking at him, I was startled by the expression in his eyes. They were fixed on a distant corner of the room. Following his gaze, I saw that he was looking at with such a hypnotic concentration. So absorbed was he in the contemplation of the packets that was so plainly exposed, that he seemed to be entirely oblivious as what was going on around him. I aroused him from his trance by jocularly calling Gibbs' attention to the display of money. I expected in this way to save Innes from committing the acts which he seemingly did commit. Imagine, then, my dilemma in which I saw was placed when Gibbs confided to me the morning after what had occurred the night before. I was positive that Ennis had taken the money, yet I possessed no proof of it. I could not tell Gibbs, and I dare not speak to Ennis. Of course, monsieur, you do not need to be told that Ennis is not a thief in the ordinary sense of the word. He has no need to steal, yet apparently cannot help doing so. I am sure that no attempt has been made to pass those notes. They are doubtless in his house at Kensington at this present moment. He is, in fact, a kleptomaniac, or a maniac of some sort. And now, Monsieur Valmont, was my hint regarding the silver spoons of any value to you? Of the most infinite value, Mr. Dacre. Then let me make another suggestion. I leave it entirely to your bravery, a bravery which I confess I do not myself possess. Will you take a hansom, drive to Mr. Ennis's house at the Cromwell Road, and confront him quietly, and ask for the return of the packet? I am anxious to know what will happen. If he hands it to you, as I expect he will, then you must tell Mr. Gibbs the whole story. Mr. Dacre, your suggestion shall be immediately acted upon, and I thank you for your compliments to my courage. I found that Mr. Ennis inhabited a very grand house. After a time he entered the study on the ground floor to which I had been conducted. He held my card in his hand and was looking with the same surprise. I think I have not the pleasure of knowing you, Mr. Valmont, he said, courteously enough. No, I've been called on business, or rather. I was once investigator for the French government, and now I'm doing private detective work in London. Ah, and how is it supposed to interest me? I have nothing I wish investigated. I did not send for you, did I? No, Mr. Ennis, I merely took the liberty of calling to ask you if you would let me have the package you took out of Mr. Bentham Gibbs' frock coat on the night of the 23rd. Wishes it returned, does he? Yes. Ennis calmly went to a desk, which he unlocked and opened, displaying a veritable museum of trinkets of one sort or another. Pulling out a small drawer, he took it from a packet containing the 5 20-pound notes. Apparently, it had never been undone. With a smile, he handed it to me. You will make my apologies to Mr. Gibbs for not returning it before. Tell him I have been unusually busy of late. I shall not fail to do so, I said with a bow. Thanks so much. Good morning, Mr. Valmont. Good morning, Mr. Ennis. And so I returned the packet to Mr. Bentham Gibbs, who pulled the notes from between the pasteboard protection and begged me to accept them. That was cool. And I could have almost gotten away with it without the ads. So close. But we are going to go ahead and take a break. I will hydrate and maybe stretch. I will see you all in a few minutes. Yay, I'm back. Sorta. What's up, everyone? Hope you like the first story. Of course, I didn't realize I had switched the window. Yeah, I didn't think about me going back to the bookstore. I thought I went to the Be Right Back, which is right under the bookstore listing. To check to make sure the fireplace is still going steady. Oh, no, it's an ads again. Although I don't have the fireplace going to track 1 anymore. So hopefully I don't get the stuff. Yeah. The only thing going to the VOD track is mic audio at the moment. So at least you can hear the fireplace, and you might hear the ads playing on the fireplace because YouTube. I need to do my own fireplace scene. I need to set something on fire and... Anyway. We're back. And we're going to try to get through another story. Must know that last story was really about a kleptomaniac. Okay. None of that one took so long. That was... That was 14 pages. It's not too bad, I guess. The next one's only 10. Of course, I need to invest in an actual book stand because my hand was falling asleep, and that's why I kept losing pages. So our next story for this wonderful Thursday night of mysteries. It's Friday. No, it's Thursday. I guess when I finish mysteries, I may switch over to mythology and go into some of my Nordic tales. Yeah, I could do that. Really make it Thursday. Okay. But anyway. Damn, hydrate again. Copy my Ultra Ball thing so I can just try to catch Pokemon occasionally. Okay. Yeah, trying to read the story. The Counterfeit Cashier by George A. Best. Part 1. It would seem that there are a few of the pomps and vanities of mankind more innocent of harm than a well-trimmed mustache or beard, or a pair of, now happily obsolete, whiskers of the mutton chop variety. Okay, this is saying mutton chops were obsolete at the beginning of the last century. Anyway. Yet it was on account of their ability to work mischief to the determent of the form, and for no other reason, that these simple adornments were denied in the working staff of the prosperous banking house of Dorrington Brothers. To speak more plainly, a cleverly planned and brilliantly executed robbery resulting in the loss of the firm of £500 sterling was directly responsible for the inauguration of the rule which is still regarded by the banking fraternity in the light of an official absurdity and somewhat flippantly referred to by Doddington's employees as the anti-whisker regulation. To accomplish their purpose, the thieves chose as an unwitting accessory one of Thomas Darwin, a cashier who was long since retired from the firm and is therefore in a position of independence, which might well be suited to include side whiskers among the other luxuries of a retired life in the suburbs. But Darwin still plies his razor with the remorselessness born of habit, and something else besides. The something else, in this case, represents the gist of my story. At the time of the robbery, Darwin was a tall and somewhat spare man of 45. He was bald at the crown of the head and wore mutton chop whiskers and a heavy mustache. Stooping slightly and walking with a short, springy step, strongly suggesting of a high-class marionette, Darwin possessed an individuality which is very marked. He was regarded as a reserved and even taciturn man who seldom spoke on any but business subjects during office hours, and some of his colleagues were wont to remark that Darwin always carried his pen as a bit between his teeth in order to curb any desire for conversation, or an exchange of confidences in the immediate neighbors. These little peculiarities of manner and of carriage earned for their owner the nickname of Automaton Darwin. On the 28th day of June, 1881, Thomas Darwin left his home in Ringgold Road, Clapton, to catch the 8:55 a.m. train to Liverpool Street. The train left Clapton station neither sooner nor later than usual, but for the first time for many years a certain corner sat on the off-side of the 10th compartment of the engine was appropriated by a stranger. Automaton Darwin was absent. The circumstances which for once had proved strong enough to disorganize even the automatic regularity of Thomas Darwin are interesting, inasmuch as they afford the revelation of the infinite pains taken by the authors to discover the most vulnerable point of an usually strong character. Darwin was well known in the north of London as a bird fancier of extraordinary enthusiasm, and an imaginary canary was his only decoy used to the effect to capture an unsuspecting cashier, as the first and most important item of the criminal program of unusual interest. Darwin had turned down one of the quieter thoroughfares leading to Ringgold Road to High Street when he was accosted by a working-man who had hurried to the gate of a large and apparently empty house which stood back a dozen yards or so from the roadway. The man wore a plasterer's cap and a long white apron. His face was plentifully smeared with the whitewash which had apparently been used indoors, and which still dropped from the brush in his hand. "Mr. Darwin," he gasped excitedly, "there's a beautiful bird, something like a canary, in one of the top rooms of this house. It flew through the window while I was washing the ceiling, and when I saw you coming down the road, I said to myself, 'Here comes the very gentleman of all others that can tell me what the bird and what it's worth.'" Darwin gazed curiously at the speaker for a moment, then consulted his watch. "I can only spare a moment of minutes," he said, "and it's a long climb to the 4th floor. Can't you keep the bird until I return from the city this evening? Or better still, bring it by to my house in Ringgold Road. I shall be home by 6 o'clock. The honest British workman shook his head sadly. "I don't think the poor little thing will live as long as that unless it's looked after at once, sir," he replied. "It's beating itself against the walls and ceiling so violently that there won't be much of it left to identify if I don't open the windows again and let it go. However, sir, I'm sorry to have troubled you. I thought you might be interested, having read some of the articles in Bird Fancier's Guide, and knowing you but well by sight. But don't go and lose the train on my account. Perhaps it's only an ordinary canary, after all." For a moment, Darwin hesitated. The 8:48 down whistled to the Clapton station, scarcely 100 yards away. He had still quite 6 minutes to spare. The plasterer was already slowly walking up the weed-grown path towards the open door of the house. Darwin flung open the rusty gate and reached the hall door in a dozen quick, jerky steps. "This way, sir," cried the workman, mounting a heavily oaken staircase once more rapidly, without looking around. "Be careful of the ladder on the second landing. It's a bit dark up there, and for the lobby window hasn't been cleaned for a year or two, and the paper hangers who were doing the first floor rooms yesterday have left a lot of things about." At this moment, a heavy clang resounded through the house. The hall door had been hastily closed, and the crash was followed by an ominous shriek of a rusty bolt. "It's only the wind, sir," explained the pastor, noticing that Darwin peered suspiciously over the banisters into the suddenly darkened hall below. "A wonderfully draughty house it is." And a wonderfully draughty house it certainly was, seeing as the heavy door had closed with a reverberating crash, while the leaves of the chestnut trees outside were undisturbed by a single breath of wind. "The canary's in this room," announced Darwin's guide as the last flight of stairs, liberally strewn with obstacles that had been slowly and carefully ascended. "I reckon it'd been a breakneck job for anybody to rush us last flight," he added impressively, throwing open the door of a small room as he spoke, and respectfully making way for Darwin to enter first. A rough deal table stood before the center of the room, and a narrow iron mantel-shelf held an empty beer bottle, the neck of which was fitted a lighted candle. The apartment was as innocent of daylight as a banker's strong-room. While Darwin was peering somewhat impatiently around the room to discover the whereabouts of the imprisoned bird, and the window by which it had entered, the door was slowly closed behind him, and turning sharply around, he was just in time to see the workman turn the key in the back. "What are you doing with that door, man?" he demanded angrily. "I'm just locking it in case of accidents," replied the workman coolly. "And to prevent any unauthorized person tampering with the lock, I've withdrawn the key and taken charge of it myself. We don't want the precious bird to escape after taking all the trouble, do we, Mr. Darwin?" With rapid movement, Darwin seized the dusty bottle, and regardless of the dripping grease from the candle, raised it threateningly above his head. "Open that door, you scoundrel, or I'll beat you where you stand," he cried furiously. "I'm not the kind of man to stand by any foolery of the sort, and I'll give you exactly 10 seconds to—" The bank cashier stopped abruptly. He was gazing into the barrel of a heavy revolver. And very firmly held within a couple of feet from his head. "Be as good as to replace our candlestick on the shelf, Mr. Darwin," said the plasterer quietly. "You very kindly give me 10 seconds to perform a certain movement in order to retain my brains, and I'll grant you the exact same time to which to save your own. Replace the bottle on the shelf." Darwin shrugged his shoulders and obeyed. "I suppose it's useless to argue with you under the circumstances," he growled sullenly. "Quite useless, Thomas," was the emphatic reply. "I'm glad to find you realize the utter helplessness of a mere argument. Under the circumstances, it will make matters work more easily for both of us. And now I'll show you to the canary, for we've no time to spare." A trapdoor in the ceiling of the room opened mysteriously at this moment, and a pair of daintily trousered legs emerged through the aperture, followed by a frock coat, a pair of well-trimmed whiskers, and a bald head. These component parts of Lombardian respectability wavered for a moment in midair, and the sum total dropped lightly onto the deal table underneath. Darwin stared wildly at the newcomer for a moment, and every particle of color fled from his face. The man was an exact counterpart of himself. "You devil!" gasped Darwin hoarsely, as the whole of the cunning devised plot was revealed at a glance at the faultlessly attired figure on the table. "You're going to impersonate me at Dorrington and rob the bank!" I guess I'm going to try, was the quiet answer. I think that instead of using ungentlemanly language, you ought to be really grateful for me for undertaking your work for a whole day, Mr. Darwin. I've had 10 years' experience as a bank cashier, and I'm fully aware of the exacting nature of your work. That get-up is absolutely perfect, Dick, exclaimed the plasterer, admiring the... Upon my soul, you're more like Automaton Darwin than the original is at the present moment. Our excellent model appears to be hardly himself this morning. Darwin's double produced a small mirror from his pocket and surveyed his features critically. I must touch up the left eyebrow, Jack, he said, addressing his colleague. Scarcely grey enough at the nose end, but the right-hand whisker wants darkening a bit, and my scarf is tied too neatly. Get my makeup box out of the cupboard, and be sharp about it. Darwin must not arrive at the office too late. It isn't like him. I haven't seen a single minute behind time for the last 15 years, ejaculated the cashier triumphantly. You'll be arrested the moment you enter the bank. I don't think I shall, replied the double, with a bland smile, touching up rapidly as he spoke. I sent a very discreetly worded telegram in your name explaining my unpunctuality. One of your colleagues will be therefore officiating at your desk when I arrive at the bank, so I shan't have any trouble about keys and locked drawers. I think that when you're seeing me walk so and bent over an imaginary desk with a pen between my teeth in this fashion, and grunt a good morning like that, in the voice of the old weary parrot, you'll acknowledge that you've been a good master, and I an apt pupil. Darwin gasped. The imitations of carriage and manner and of speech were alike perfect. What are you going to do with the money? He groaned. Pay it over the counter in the usual way, of course, replied the clever rogue cheerfully. A number of my acquaintances, our mutual friend Jack among them, will call at the bank during the morning and present checks of various amounts, all of which will be duly honored and paid in gold or notes without any reference in the signature book. And while I am attending to these, to the ordinary customers at the bank, you will be allowed to remain in an interesting apartment and amuse yourself as you think best with the somewhat limited means at your disposal. I shall amuse myself by excusing the thieves from this den, exclaimed Darwin defiantly. And as for your plot, it's simply absurd, the most impractical thing I've ever heard. That remains to be proved, Mr. Darwin, said the plasterer with a laugh. And while you are engaged in making practical tests of the scheme you are quite at liberty to escape from what you have ungenerously described as our thieves' den, if you can. We might have had recourse to chloroform or other less humane measures to keep you quiet for a while, but we have prepared to trust entirely to bolts and bars, coupled with a little gentle persuasion from the mouth of a loaded pistol. And now, as my city friend is anxious to catch up the next train, I must ask you to stand with your face towards the wall, so that we may make our exit with as much dignity and as little noise as possible. As soon as you hear the key turned from outside, you may attack either the door or the table, or anything else which you fancy. If you turn around or make any movement before that time, I shall be obliged to break my only commandment, and which I have taken any pains to keep. Darwin laughed harshly. I have no fear of the safety of the bank, otherwise I might be tempted to defy you, he remarked somewhat weakly. Let me see your back, demanded the man with the pistol. Darwin glared sullenly at the extended weapon for a moment, then turned to face the wall. Part 2. The apartment in which the unhappy... Book. The apartment in which the unhappy cashier was imprisoned was well chosen by the perpetrators of the Dorrington outrage. The window had been bricked up, and the heavy door was secured by a mortised lock and bolted on the outside. The trapdoor in the low ceiling had been carefully locked and the key removed after the dramatic entrance of Darwin's double. It did not take the prisoner many attempts to realize that any attempts to escape from this cunningly chosen cage without outside assistance would be worse than futile. It was certainly possible that someone might be taking the air in one of the neighboring gardens far below, and this was a forlorn hope which had situated presently in Darwin's mind. Although the difficulty of communicating with the outside world from an apparently light-proof and soundproof den of the fourth floor of an empty house appeared insurmountable at best. The outlook was by no means an encouraging one, but Darwin was not the kind of man to rest with folded arms after his first review of the seemingly desperate situation. On the contrary, he took a keen delight in weighing together the few possibilities and probabilities which the case presented, although it was obvious that the former would outbalance the latter on a 10-to-1 scale. Darwin's first act was to feel carefully for the Vesta case, which he carried in his waistcoat pocket, and when he was satisfied that the means of obtaining artificial light were available, he extinguished his candle. For a moment it seemed that the darkness of night had descended suddenly upon the room, but gradually the prison door was outlined by a single ray of sunlight, a ray so small and so dim that it fell feebly on the lower panels, leaving the rest of the woodwork in deep shadow. Darwin walked to the door and eagerly followed the course of the beam to its ingress. A tiny spot of white light, close to the ceiling, marked the spot at which the cheering ray entered. The cashier climbed onto his table and examined the wall thoroughly. The hole in the wall through which the light entered was so small that it might have easily been covered by a threepenny piece. Darwin struck the spot sharply with his clenched fist, and was delighted to find that his hand went clean through the wallpaper and out into the daylight beyond. At one time the room had apparently been ventilated by a simple expedient of removing a couple of bricks, and there was not even a regulation grating on the outside wall. On the inside, the primitive ventilator had recently been papered over, and this was probably the only work executed on the premises by the sham plasterer. Thank you, Legacy. Unfortunately, the ventilator had been built so near the ceiling that the imprisoned cashier could neither break through the aperture nor bring his lips to the same level. Standing on the tips of his toes with his right hand extended to the utmost, Darwin found that he could wave a handkerchief on the outside. But this movement, owing to the lack of space, was so slightly that it was scarcely likely to be noticed from below, much less interpreted as a signal of distress. For several minutes the excited prisoner stood on the tabletop, calling wildly for help, with his head thrown back and every joint of his body racked under the strain of the painfully extended arm, until the very agony of his position forced him to desert for a while, his only loophole of escape. The clock of the neighboring church struck 10, and Darwin, returning to the floor of his prison, glanced desperately around the room in search of any idea which might be inspired by a few inanimate objects which the room contained. The inspiration came in the form of a roll of wallpaper which lay on the floor, and Darwin, realizing that the plan of the campaign was better than none at all, acted upon without a moment's hesitation. Unrolling the paper on the table, he tore it in half, a dozen large squares, and rapidly wrote on with his fountain pen a message to the blank side of each square, worded as follows: £50 reward. The man who's impersonating me, Thomas Darwin at Dorrington's Bank, Lombard Street, City, is an impostor. Have him arrested without delay. I am imprisoned in a large empty house on the west side of Dean Street, Upper Clapton. Anyone delivering this message to the bank before 12 o'clock noon on this 20th day of June, 1881, will receive the above-mentioned reward. When the last of these remarkable messages had been completed, Darwin climbed the table once more, and another moment the first of the recently written messages had been posted through the ventilator, with an accompaniment of piercing yells which caused the stand and dignified cashier to blush for the very shame that he uttered them. A dog barked fiercely from the yard to the left, and a freshening breeze came the releasing message of the same direction. One by one the bills vanished from sight, and when the last fluttered away into the street, Darwin still stood by the tiny loophole, listening hopefully for an answer to his repeated exclamations and interrogations, which appeared to fall on no one more intelligent ears than those of the highly exasperated dog in the garden beneath, whose irritating yap rose superior to any sound in the neighborhood. An hour passed slowly by, and the clock at St. John's Church struck 11. Scarcely had the sound of the last stroke died away before an unmistakable murmur of voices rose faintly, but with sufficient distinctness to enable Darwin to locate his speakers, and to catch the opening words of a neighborly conversation which was apparently taking place in the garden to the right. It was simply a polite inquiry as to the well-being of certain cucumbers, which Darwin interrupted by a stentorian, "Below there!" The sensitive hound heard the challenge and answered it so noiselessly that it distracted the cashier danced on the table in a perfect frenzy of rage and excitement. "Lie down, you brute!" exclaimed the invisible speaker. "The dog's a perfect nuisance. Speaking of cucumbers reminds me." An empty beer bottle crashed through the cucumber frame at the moment. It fell from a great height and burst with the violence of a lyddite shell at the very feet of an amateur gardener and sympathetic friend. With a dismal whine, the dog slunk into his kennel and lay trembling in the darkness corner. His master stepped back to the gate, angrily with the upper stony windows of the house next door. But the only sign of movement visible in that direction was a gently waving handkerchief, which flapped weirdly against the wall just below the eaves of the empty house. "Hello there! What the deuce are you playing at?" cried the enraged householder. "I'll see that you are punished outright to the cost of £50. "And I'll give you £50 to break into this house and let me out," came the strangely muffled voice of the owner of the handkerchief. Part 3. When the counterfeit Darwin arrived at Dorrington's bank, he found, as he had been assumed, that one of the extra counterhands had been installed in the place of the absent cashier. A number of bags of gold and silver from the strong-room were being transferred by bank porter from the bullion trolley to the capacious closets beneath the counter, and the extra cashier was engaged in arranging certain bundles of Bank of England notes in their respective pigeonholes. One of the bullion bags had already been opened and the contents transferred into the cash drawer of Darwin's desk. With the utmost coolness and nonchalance, the clever impostor replied to the greeting of the unsuspecting colleague, checked the number of bullion bags and the amount of loose cash, and ran through the bundles of banknotes with a firm yet rapid touch which only acquired by long practice. Then he dismissed the substitute with a laconic "all right," and cashed several checks for small amounts, canceling the signatures, filling the forms with a number of quick, jerky movements which were an excellent imitation of Darwin's characteristic business methods. His counterfeit of the absent cashier handwriting in the entering book was scarcely so successful, although well calculated to deceive a casual observer. Darwin usually broad-nibbed J-pen, and his entries took the form of a thick, undulating line which was quite ineligible at first sight. The impostor's calligraphy, for reasons of his own, was even more illegible. When the cashier at the desk E had negotiated a dozen small checks and received a packet of bills from a bank runner, a draft for the large amount was handed in by a well-to-do farmer. Some £500 in gold were weighed up and shoveled across the counter. The country person, exceptionally mild appearance, followed slowly to the rail of the farmer, and this dignitary received in return for the modest check of £50, which he presented 5 Bank of England notes for £100 each. This was the first of a long series of similar errors made by the fictitious cashier during the course of that exceptionally busy morning. Certain highly respectable and benevolent-looking city gentlemen received, without any protest or even comment, gold and banknotes representing more than 5 times the face value of the checks handed in. These greatly favored individuals left Dorringtons with a calmness of demeanor which was said to emanate from a quiet conscience, and wended their way one to the Bank of England, where the magic wand of the old lady of Threadneedle Street converted into bright new sovereigns the crisp banknotes which had been recently handed to them from across the counter of the Lombard Street Bank. The mild-looking curate and the well-to-do farmer, and three benevolent and highly respectable city gentlemen, were yet unscrupulous enough to impose upon the absent-mindedness of an overworked cashier of inferior social position to themselves, inaugurated a discreet and well-regulated possession to transact business with the kind old lady who never breaks her promise to pay a bearer. So far, the whole of the daring and carefully prepared program had carried through without a hitch, and only one of the numerous clients of Dorrington's bank had reason to complain of any irregularity or want of attention on the part of the cashier at desk E. Darwin invariably left his desk for luncheon at 12 o'clock and returned a praiseworthy punctuality precisely on the stroke of 1. On this occasion, however, the desk was closed and the drawers locked at 11:55, and Darwin's immediate neighbors were somewhat surprised to see their colleague don his silk hat and prepare to leave the bank, in spite of the fact that a wealthy client had handed a draft for negotiation and was waiting. As a matter of fact, the counterfeit cashier had just received a telegram bearing a very important message that read, "Bird escaped, 11:30. Make tracks." So the recipient of the short but startling communication decided to make tracks without unnecessary delay. Even as he walked down the bank with quick, springy steps, a hansom dashed up to the entrance, and the man tumbled out of the vehicle in remarkable celerity, a tall, dark man with mutton-chop whiskers and a very heavy mustache. It was the automaton Darwin himself. Darwin met his prototype with the doorstep, and throwing his arms around the other's waist, he loudly and somewhat incoherently called for assistance. Several porters and other employees of the bank sprang forward and tore the struggling men apart. The head porter gazed from one to the other in speechless astonishment. "Which is Mr. Darwin?" asked someone from the back of the crowd. This remark gave his impostor his clue, and he acted upon it immediately. "Arrest that man at once!" he cried, pointing at Darwin. "He is impersonating me for felonious purposes. He intends to rob the bank. Call in a policeman without delay." The astonished crowd at once turned to Darwin, who struggled fiercely and most unwisely with a dozen hands laid roughly on him, and was speechless with rage. "You fools!" he hissed at length. "What are you doing, idiots? Seize the other man. He's been robbing the bank since 10 o'clock this morning. Call the manager." The manager was already elbowing his way through the crowd. "What is the meaning of this, Darwin?" he asked sternly. "The other man?" gasped the cashier incoherently. "Arrest the other man!" "What other man? What do you refer to?" asked the manager irritably. "The rogue who has been impersonating me!" cried Darwin. "He has robbed the bank, and the fools have let him escape. He and his confederates imprisoned me in an empty house in Chapton." The manager shrugged his shoulders and turned inquiringly to the crowd. "There certainly was another man here half a minute ago, sir. He looked exactly like Mr. Darwin," explained the head porter. "But he must have slipped out after ordering us to arrest him. When we struggled so, of course, we thought we had the thief, and the other one was a real Mr. Darwin. I hope you understand, sir, but it's rather a difficult matter to explain. It was all so sudden and unexpected that nobody thought of doing to detain both of them. And he was so much like him in his own reflection, it was like in a looking-glass. I hope my meaning is clear to you, sir." "Not very," said the manager shortly. "Step into my room, Mr. Darwin. I shall probably hear a more lucid account of this highly complicated affair from your own lips, and in the meantime we'll send a wire to Scotland Yard." But long before the lengthy and almost incredible story was concluded, a tall, clean-shaven man had cashed £1,000 worth of notes at the Bank of England, and afterwards walked home in a leisurely way to burn a pair of mutton-chop whiskers and a wig with a very bald crown. And her head kept cramping. I don't know how many times I lost my page. Ah. I would never thought that a law would be, a rule would have been enacted because of facial hairstyling. That is an interesting way to do it, though. And the other man had actually paid attention to him long enough that he knew how to do it. So he was someone else from the bank. It had to have been. Okay, let me see how long the next story will be, because I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it through it tonight. So that was just 10 pages. May wait until next week anyway, because the next two stories are from the same author. So we got Clue of the Silver Spoons from Robert Barr tonight, and we got the Counterfeit Cashier by George A. Best. Not bad, not bad. That's the first 4 authors down from this book now. Guess we'll wait for Prince of Swindlers next week by Guy Boothby. But thank you everyone for coming in. Those who didn't know, yesterday was actually my 48th birthday. Let me go and switch to bookstore just for the hell of it. But yeah, I hope the sound is considerably better tonight than it was last week, because I've got 21 out of my 24 sound panels up. So it should be dulling all the other sounds around the area. I wouldn't hear anything from my speakers right now because... No, I can hear the faint buzzing. But yeah. I'm old, but I can still hear when wire signals are being disrupted. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and end off early today. Tomorrow, more fairy tales from the Pink Fairy book. Because, Friday Night Fairy Tales. And yeah. Let's see who might be under writing and reading to raid. Or if anyone has any suggestions. What is this one person always wanting the spider on his screen? Who's Henna? Ah, that's a rerun anyway. Is it actually? I've never actually seen someone have the rerun tab show up on their streams before. She has a nice voice, though. Oh, she's a cat sit. Cool. Anyway. Instead, she's doing a rerun, so... Now, let's go ahead and continue how the chain has been going. I'm already there, apparently. But let's go ahead and raid Hart Griffin. But I'm definitely going to have to listen to that other reader sometime. So, again, thank you all for coming in. I hope to see you back tomorrow for Friday Night Fairy Tales. So I will see you then. Meantime, let me go and post those raid messages. Raids for followers. Raid for subscribers. Or if you want to use the subscriber one, you can just unlock it. It's only like, I think you've got it set for 100 points to unlock it. Oh, let's see. Unlock a random sub, unlock a choose the emote to sub. Only 100 points. If you follow me at all, you have 100 points. Well, let's raid Hart Griffin. For more Don Quixote. Thank you for coming in, Taka. Guess I'll probably see you over in Dusks after the raid. I'm actually lurking in there already, so I'll see everyone next time.